Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is our second webinar in a series of 3 for schools in India. My name is Bernard Fawcett, and I'm one of the international consultants for GL Education. I'm a former teacher myself and now work supporting teachers across South and Southeast Asia, helping them to get the most from the range of GL Education's assessments. I'm also joined by Priya, and I'm going to hand over to Priya, who's going to introduce herself in the session.
Sure. Thank you, Bernard. My name is Priyamvadha Taneja. I'm the founder of Priyamvadha Taneja Consulting. We run an education consulting firm working with schools and corporates in the K-12 space. In addition to providing consulting services, we also offer professional development workshops for teachers and school leaders on curriculum and pedagogy and learning, leadership and governance. And we're absolutely delighted for all of you to join us for this extremely important topic, student well-being. So following the disruption of last year, and as you've all seen, student well-being has become more important to bring to the forefront of our discussions. I mean, we've seen that some students have done well studying remotely, while others have really missed schools, and that may have impacted their progress, and probably they've lost confidence as a result. They miss the interaction, learning together, learning with the teachers. So in today's session, we're going to talk about the pupils' attitudes to self and school, PASS, well-being, which focuses on 3 broader areas, and Bernard is going to talk about those in a minute. We'll also look at how we can use the data to identify students at risk and how we can put a well-structured program to evaluate the impact of the interventions. We would welcome questions from the participants. There is a Q&A at the bottom, and if you have any questions, please put them. We'll answer them as we go along or at the end of the session. So moving forward, Bernard, I have a question. So from your experience of working with international schools, how important do you think it is for schools to understand how students are feeling and about themselves as learners?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's extremely important, and as you mentioned in the introduction, with the disruption that's happened over the last 18 months or so, it's ever more a priority for teachers. Talking to teachers, well-being is at the top of everybody's priorities at the moment. And I know myself as a parent and a teacher myself, I know how important it is for students to be happy in school. Happy students tend to be successful students, and if students are unhappy in school and in their learning, they tend to struggle with the work and probably won't do as well as they could do. I think the challenge for schools, for teachers, is that we often don't know how students are feeling themselves, because they quietly get on with things without making too much of a fuss. They'll come into school and they'll just quietly get on. It's been even more difficult with remote learning that's been going on for some time now in many schools, for teachers to actually ask those questions about how students are feeling and understand what are their barriers to learning. So if we can spot those issues early enough, and we can understand how students are feeling, then we can spot that early enough, and we can deal with them, that those issues don't become big problems. So if we can identify students who are at risk of disengaging with their studies, find out what lies beneath their feelings, and then do something about that, we can help all students to reach their full potential and succeed.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, on one hand, as you said, you might lose some students because you don't know. And as a teacher, you're busy doing what you're doing, teaching the kids, though, and especially in the remote learning space, when it's so difficult that you don't have the student with you, you're not talking to them in corridors, you don't know what's really going on in their minds. And also the fact that as teachers, we may not be professionals to understand and really find out where what's going on and intervene. But tell me something, do you think we can really measure well-being? I mean, how does that really work in reality? It's all good to say this, but can you really measure it?
That's a really good question, and as I've mentioned, often as you've said, teachers are very busy people, and actually, if you throughout a school day or a day of learning remotely, a teacher has a very, very small amount of time for each student, and actually being able to ask the questions and have the time to listen is very difficult, which is where the Pupils Attitude to Self and School survey comes in, and it's a very useful tool which teachers can use to actually find out really how students are feeling, and students are much more willing to give honest answers if it's a survey than it is perhaps answering questions. So the PASS survey was developed by a team of educational psychologists, and it's been standardized on thousands of students worldwide. So it's been tested and tested over and over again with thousands of students. It's actually made up of 50 statements, which students then answer how they feel about those statements. And the answers to those 50 statements are combined into 9 attitudinal factors. So those 50 statements ask similar things in different ways, and those answers are combined together into these 9 factor scores. So, for example, the 9 factors are how are they feeling about school, their perceived learning capability, their own self-regard as a learner, attitudes to teachers, general work ethic, confidence in learning, attitudes to attendance, and response to curriculum demands. So when you're looking at the report, you get scores for each of those 9 factors. And what's really important is those scores are standardized so that you can see how your students are feeling in comparison to all the students who've previously completed the PASS survey, because that's really important, because talking to teachers who've tried to create their own surveys to ask students is actually knowing whether a response is significant or not. Because if a student just answers negatively to one statement or one question, that may not be significant, because that might be how all 14-year-old students would answer that question. The power of PASS is that it's standardized, so you can see how other 14-year-olds would have answered those groups of questions that combine together to make up a factor. Mm-hmm. And the reports use a traffic light system to color code, so you get the red, amber, green system there, so it's very quick and easy to spot concerns when looking at the reports. So schools can actually go through this data very quickly and prioritize students with the red, and they can then follow up, and that gives schools, teachers a flag then to go and dig a little bit deeper with students to find out what's actually going on underneath their feelings. And what's always good to see when I'm working with schools looking at reviewing their past data is, as they go down the list, there's always a few students that they say, yes, we knew about that student, we realized that they had issues, we're not surprised about that, that exactly matches our, what we knew about those students. But equally, there's always a number of students that they say, we didn't know about that student. We didn't know about that student. And those are the important ones. The first thing is they have confidence in the data because they can see students that they're aware of, but it always flags up students that they weren't aware of, and they're then able to go and ask the questions and do something about those students who are struggling.
Yeah, and I think I really like what you've said about that it's in traffic lights. So it really doesn't stigmatize the entire process. It's just about that here are the students who need some help, and the school needs to intervene and give them the support that it's needed. So you touched a little bit about on the data. So tell us a little more about how can we go deeper and how can we dig deeper? How can teachers or schools dig deeper into that data?
Yeah, sure. And I think the point you made as well is really an important one, not to stigmatize students just because they might be feeling a little bit negative about things at that particular point. What's important to note is it's a snapshot in time, and it's how they're feeling at a time. And actually very quickly with some interventions, you know, if you resurvey students, that can change quite quickly how they feel about their experience in school. So as we've mentioned, the color coding, it makes it very easy to spot low scores. And what that means for schools is they can quickly identify students to prioritize for a follow-up conversation. I think it's important to note that PASS doesn't give you all of the answers. It doesn't tell you everything, but it will highlight students that you need to go and ask further questions and dig a little bit deeper. So it means as well that sort of teachers can keep a lookout for particular students and ask from time to time, you know, how are things going? How are you doing at the moment? And see how things are going. So it's you know, something which can help ongoing support for students. So we've got a number of case studies on our website from schools who've adopted this approach to identifying their most fragile learners and then keeping a check on them. And particularly during periods of remote learning, they've prioritized the students who they perhaps need to have that more frequent contact with. But what's really important is that the PASS interventions, which are supporting the PASS survey, actually give teachers suggested questions and follow-up strategies to help them find out what lies beneath those low factor scores, and then to be able to do something to support the students. And actually, you know, many schools are now surveying more than once a year. Originally, it was designed as a once a year to see how students are feeling. And actually, a lot of schools are doing it maybe twice a year to track how students are feeling and to track the effectiveness of their intervention programs. So if you can identify issues early enough, work with students, help and support them, and then you can resurvey students again later on in the year to see the impact of that, and hopefully you'll see improved scores as students are feeling more engaged with what's going on in school.
Sure. So from your experience, Bernard, that the schools who do the PASS, I mean, do they do it, does the classroom teacher do it, or is it a whole school activity? How is it really structured? I mean, from what I'm hearing is that it builds up the capacity for the classroom teacher rather than the students who are fragile or struggling to go to a psychologist or a counselor, that it gives it builds that capacity, and the classroom teacher in her own way can intervene. So tell me, how have schools across done it? How do they develop intervention strategies? And so if you can share a model or something which has worked in your experience in schools.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Schools do it in different ways. Every school is different in their approach and how they do that. Generally, schools will do this as a whole school strategy or program. So they'll survey students across the whole school. I think it's what they do next is where it varies from school to school. It depends on the resources that schools have available to them as well. So some schools do have counsellors that are available. So very often the school counsellors will pick up the support for students. So they will have an identified list of students that they'll have a chat with, and that they'll then, you know, monitor and support. So if schools have that already, that's great, and they can use the data to feed into that program where school counsellors are supporting individual students. But actually, a lot of schools, it comes down to classroom teachers to support students. And again, schools will then support teachers and put training in place for teachers in terms of how they can use the past data, and, as we mentioned, the types of questions that they can ask and the types of intervention strategies that they can use with students. So very often it might be down to individual class teachers that will take on a responsibility for maybe 4 or 5 students that they will have a chat with, and they'll keep a close eye on during that program. But, you know, as I mentioned, I think the really important thing is actually making teachers feel confident about having those conversations with students and how to deal with those answers. And that's where the intervention strategies really do provide a lot of support on that, in terms of the types of questions that teachers can ask, and then suggested strategies that can be done at whole school level. So think programs that the whole school can work on, class level type work, and then things that you might need to do with individuals as well. So there's all of that support there for teachers.
Sure. So if a school does take on this test and takes the survey, and there are intervention strategies you mentioned, which GL provides as a support to the school, is there training available? Do the teachers need it? What are the other things that you sort of provide to the school for them to be successfully using this and implementing this in their schools?
Yeah, one thing to mention is that all of the intervention strategies were developed by practicing teachers working in schools. So they've been tried and tested by teachers. I'm sure that many teachers will come up with their own ideas and their own strategies, and it's one of those things that as support programs develop, teachers will be able to add their own strategies, and because they know their own students better than anybody. But the suggested strategies have been developed by teachers and tried in the classroom, and we know that they work because of that work that's been done by teachers. We do offer training and support, so we have on-demand training for teachers. So we've got level 1 and level 2 past training, which will actually guide teachers, school counsellors, anyone within the school that's going to be working with past data and working with students. Those on-demand video training sessions will actually explain how to interpret the results and how to use those intervention strategies to actually make a real impact with students.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Bernard. Before I open for questions, is there anything else that you'd like to ask which I haven't covered as yet?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of the sort of the basics about the survey, how it works and how schools use it. So it is very much really over to delegates who've joined the session today. If they do have any questions, if they can put that through the Q&A, we can then pick that up now.
So I have a question, Bernard, here, which is talking about that how does PASS work? How do schools implement it in a remote system? I mean, so understandably, this existed before the schools were face-to-face, given that in India, we've had about a year and a half of being at teaching remotely. Some schools are opening up a little bit, but there's still this factor that a lot of schools haven't opened. So how do you use the survey remotely?
Okay, that is a really, really important question. I mean, the survey can be completed digitally. So anywhere where the students can, using a web browser, they can complete the survey. Actually, a lot of our schools that were using PASS prior to COVID have actually waited until students are back in school rather than actually delivering it during remote learning. And one of the key reasons for that is actually a lot of the statements are about the experience that students are having in school. And I think a lot of schools felt that it might be a little bit confusing with those statements referring to actually being in school rather than remote learning, which is quite a different experience for schools. Some have used it, but I think you would just need to be a little bit cautious about the results that you are seeing. And I think it probably would be one of those things that as students return to school and are back in school rather than remote learning, it's a really good tool to see how students are coping with that transition back to being in the classroom. And I think when we've looked at the data over the last year, it's been very different in different countries around the world because the experience has been very different for different countries around the world. And some countries, schools had the opportunity to come back in during 2020. They might have gone on to remote learning again, but they might have had a period where they were back in school. And the data from PASS was really useful for them to see how students were adapting. And we did actually develop some additional strategies for re-engaging with students once they're back in school. And so that's a really important point to mention about the intervention strategies. There are some for re-engaging with students post-remote learning.
Yeah, and I think that, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to finish by saying that a lot of schools that use the data during remote learning had perhaps completed the survey prior to going on remote learning. And actually what we've seen is that actually students, when they come back into school, they actually have quite positive attitudes towards being back in school, because it's almost like, they're relieved to be back in school, and they want to be back in school. They want to be having that social interaction.
Yeah, I think that's a relevant point. But what you talked about doing this survey when they're back, and how do you re-engage them? I think that's really important, because being back in school can also be about how do you re-engage them in the learning, because habits and behaviors have changed over a period of time. You've been learning remotely, and now you're face-to-face with the teachers. So that also becomes really, really important. We have a few questions here. I'm going to read out the first one. So this is from someone who says that we've been doing mindfulness dedicatedly happening every week in our school, yet now students are facing a lot of difficulties to do virtual learning. So how can that be helped? So basically, it's a generic question about how do you support virtual learning?
Yeah, and I think a really good example of this was we've got a case study from Garden International School in Malaysia, and there's also some recordings on our website of some sessions we've done with them, and I think they're a very good example of how to actually support students during that virtual learning experience. And as I mentioned earlier on, I think it's about doing something for all students, but also prioritizing those students who you feel that are most at risk, and having those more frequent check-ins with those students who are most at risk. And, actually providing opportunities to connect more socially rather than just about work, but connecting with students in a way that allows them to discuss how they're feeling about their experiences and talk about that. But I think, as I say, to listen to real teachers' experience of that is probably better than me talking about that. And as I say, we've got a case study and a couple of webinar recordings from Garden International School in Malaysia, which I think will talk about that in a lot more detail.
Yeah, thank you. I think another question is similar about how do you support students? It's becoming exhaustive for students, and how do you support because they're losing interest? I mean, if I can add a little bit from my experience, that well, understandably so, it has been hard for students and for teachers as well to be in the remote learning environment. But what Bernard just said about individual check-ins and about differentiating that which are the students which need more support and which are the students who will benefit from the generic instruction, right? So how do you do check-ins with the students? How do you identify the at-risk student, going back to the past survey? And then how do you do interventions? Because there's a possibility there's going more than what we are seeing. And the past survey could be one of the tools that could help you in identifying that. Yeah, I think that's all the questions that you have. Do you have anything on your screen, Bernard? Any questions that have come up?
I can't see anything else that's come in at the moment. So I think we'll assume that everybody's asked the questions that they want to ask. So really, there's only a couple of things for us to say. And one is a big thank you to everyone for joining us today. There is one more webinar left in our series. So the third webinar in the series is about data-informed student mentoring. So it's about using the data in an informed way to support student mentoring. And we have one of my colleagues, Veer Shah, talking about his experience at the British School of Kathmandu and how they used data in terms of mentoring, and that's on the 11th of August. I think I might just have had one last minute question which has come in. Sure. So the one question that's come in is about, do you find the results are accurate for all students around the world? And I think that's a really important question to ask about PASS, because PASS was originally designed in the UK, and it was originally standardized in the UK, but we're now working with schools in over 100 countries around the world. And in 2018, we actually decided to look at that to see whether there were any differences in the data we were seeing in our international schools to those that we see in the UK. And we actually found that as part of that review that students appear to be very similar the world over. So students are students wherever they are in the world. They have similar anxieties and concerns, and actually the data was very, very similar across all of those international schools as we see in the UK. So yes, we do see it works, you know, regardless of where students are around the world. And another question that's come in is about comparing past data pre and post-COVID. So we've not actually changed the standardization of the data. So the standardization is the same as it was pre-COVID. So you can actually see how students are feeling now and how that compares to how students generally were feeling before COVID. But what we have done is we've published a review of the data to show what differences we've seen in data pre and post-COVID. It's actually been very small, subtle differences. We've not seen huge changes. One thing I mentioned earlier on was that we have seen perhaps that as students are re-engaging, a slightly more positive attitude towards being in school. And that's probably because they're a little bit relieved to be back and amongst friends and learning. But it's been different around the world, and you know, there's not been very very strong differences in the data. I think that's all of the questions.
Yeah, I think so. Don't have anything on my screen either.
Oh,
So
there's one last one, which we'll just pick up this one last one. How can I make sure students respond accurately rather than them thinking how the teacher wants them to respond? And I think this is a question that I'm asked a lot actually about using the PASS survey. And I think it's important that when you present PASS to students, you actually tell them this is their opportunity to give their voice. It's an opportunity for student voice. It's their opportunity to tell teachers how they feel. If they are honest, we can actually do something about it. We as a school can make some changes to make the experience better. So it's about presenting that it's their opportunity to give their views, and that actually the school are going to listen to that and to respond to it and do something about it. So that's, you know, generally schools who present it that way, they find that they do get those honest answers from students.
Yeah, I think absolutely. In any case, I think having a student voice is so important. So on this note, I think it brings us to the end of our webinar today. So thank you very much, Bernard, and thank you to all the participants. And hopefully we'll see you next week again at the same time. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you, Priya. Goodbye.
Goodbye.